right, so we're going to call tonight's Borough Board to order. Good evening. You are lucky, or unlucky, you have me this evening. The Borough President apologizes for missing this very important presentation, but you have me. So a bit of business before, thank you, my one fan. I paid her for that. So a bit of business before we begin. In accordance with Section 13 of the Borough Board bylaws, the following vice chair has been designated by their representative chair to serve as an alternative at tonight's meeting of June 11th, 2018. Second vice chair, Renetta English, for Chairman Philip Pappas, CB3. And third vice chair, Eileen Miller, for Christine Hayda, CB11. I will accept a motion to approve these designations. First, second. You got that? All right, so moved. So we are very excited tonight. We are going to talk about the changing face of Queens. We love to talk about our diversity here in Queens, and we all know about it because we live it every day in our communities. But tonight we're going to hear a bit of statistics about the changing demographic. The Department of City Planning is New York City's primary land use agency and is instrumental in designing the city's physical and socioeconomic framework. The department's overreaching goal is to make all of New York City a better place to live by maintaining what works and improving on what doesn't. Dr. Jill Salvo is Director of the Population Division at the New York City Department of Planning. The Population Division serves as the city's in-house demographic clearinghouse, providing expertise to agencies working on needs assessments, program planning, and policy formulation. This evening, Dr. Salvo will provide us with an update on the changing demographics of Queens. He will then speak to us about the 2020 census and the urgent need for elected officials and civic leaders like yourself to help ensure a complete count. In addition, Erica Maurer will offer a demonstration of the new population fact finder, which I heard is very interactive. So we're going to have an experience tonight. So we'd like to welcome Dr. Salvo. And I think we also have John Young, the Director of the Queens Office of City Planning, with us as always. John, always a pleasure to see you. And Dr. Salvo, please begin.
Okay, those of you who know me know I can't sit down. Stand up. All right, there are three parts, as you just heard, to the presentation tonight. I'm sorry. First, I'm going to give you an overview of some of the latest numbers on Queens. It's kind of a big thing for us to make sure that when we go out, we give you some numbers that you can kind of take home with you. So we're going to do that for a few minutes. And then I'm going to turn it over to Erica, more of my staff, who is our resident expert, one of the designers of the new New York City Population Fact Finder. Just going to give you the ability to zoom in on your neighborhoods and draw portraits of them, and you'll see, do all kinds of things. How many of you know about New York City Census Fact Finder, the tool that we have had up on our website? Okay, this is, you'll see, a pretty amazing update to that. And then we're going to talk about the 2020 census, about what the city's doing to prepare. My department is obviously very much involved. I'm also very close to what's happening at City Hall regarding the census. So with that, I'm going to begin by giving you some numbers, the latest numbers. But before I do that, let me just put up the neighborhood map of Queens. Now, I just want to say this, okay? You guys know your neighborhoods better than anybody else, okay? Let's just get that on the table, all right? We break up Queens into what we call neighborhood tabulation areas, okay? NTAs. We don't pretend to be able to exactly identify North and South Corona. We're the bottom, where we break it up, okay? We don't pretend to be able to give you an exact perimeter of Jamaica, okay? Just so you know, I'm a lifelong Bronxite, okay? My son, my daughter-in-law, and my fairly new granddaughter live in Woodside. okay? So I'm out here an awful lot. I know the playgrounds. Let me tell you. So you're adopting me, is what it's coming down to. So when I show you some maps later on, I just wanted you to know that the template that we draw is intended on giving us enough sample to give you reliable numbers, okay? And also to give you what I consider to be a very nice kind of texture to the descriptions that I'll give you tonight about how neighborhoods are changing and what's happening in our neighborhoods. All right, here are the latest numbers. The latest number for the population is for July 1, 2017, okay? And that is the latest number. And you see, the Census Bureau says New York City's population is topped 8.6 million. If you look at 2000 versus 2017, the city's population's increased by 7.7%, which is phenomenal. There's no question, this is a very big increase. But let's look. You see in red, you guys have heard me before know I'm very proud of the fact that 4 of our 5 boroughs, on their own, individually, are top cities of the United States by itself. So if you count New York and Brooklyn, oh yes, we will count Brooklyn, Queens is the 5th largest city in the United States by itself, okay? Phenomenal, just phenomenal when you realize. And the reason why I do this is I speak a lot to community groups who are trying to deliver services. So I always warn them that when somebody tells you that something is 1% of the population or something is 2% of the population, be very careful, okay? Because we tend to use percentages and we minimize it, minimize those. Later on in a couple of minutes, I'm going to put up a list of the top languages spoken and the limited English proficient population. And when you say that 2% of the population or 3% of the population speaks Arabic, you might say to yourself, well, yeah, that's not really a big number. Well, it sure as heck is when you got to deliver services to that population. Okay, so the point here is that the population of Queens continues to grow, okay? And the overall increase since 2000 is about 6%, just shy of 2.4 million by our latest estimate. New York City in general is growing, but I have to tell you, what you're not seeing here is that growth to the city is actually slowing now. That's a new, kind of a new observation, a fairly recent one. Why? Because all places have a carrying capacity. And in effect, you just can't keep doing this. You can't just keep growing and growing. There are limits to growth, and we see it in our population numbers. So growth recently has slowed. Let me just put in a shout out to the Bronx, again, one of the largest cities in the country, and not to forget Staten Island. Staten Island is about the same size as Kansas City, okay? And it's somewhere like 38 or something in the country. Now, those of you who know me know that I'm a demographer. And demographers really like to describe why populations change. The total population in 2017, excuse me, is just under, it's like 2.4 million, let's say. From 2000 to 2017, the population, this is annual change between 2010 and 2017. So this is what happens each year. Each year Queens adds about 15,000 people to the population every year. Now, that doesn't tell you much. This is what tells you everything, the whole story. Let's start with what we call domestic migration. This is the exchange that occurs between Queens and the rest of the country, okay? Including the other boroughs, by the way. Okay, this is what happens each year as a result of our exchanges with the rest of the US. And Queens loses, excuse me, I don't use the word loses, but I use the word exports. Queens exports net about 25,000 people a year. That means 25,000 more go out than come in domestically. But, get a load of this, no surprise to any of you, I think, Queens gets it back by virtue of its exchanges with the rest of the world. 25,000 or so people every year, net, come in from other countries. Meaning that when you look at people going out to other countries, the estimates that we have, and you look at people coming in from other countries, Queens gains about 25,000 a year. So you see this little sliver here? This is the net effect of everybody who comes and goes. In the city of New York, several 100,000 people come and go each year. In Queens, it's probably something on the order of 250,000 people that come and go each year. The net result is near zero, meaning that net migration is not changing the numbers overall. But what I show you this because this is what alters the composition of your neighborhoods. The people that are leaving for other places in the country, people coming in from other countries, this is what alters the composition of your neighborhoods. Now, net migration has very small effect. Let me tell you, historically, this bar was out here, meaning that migration generally to New York City is negative. We lose people in our total migration picture. We lose more people than we gain. It's been like that for 50 years. It's changed though recently. We've seen now a greater influx from the rest of the country, a lot of young people coming to New York. And as a result, net migration is near zero. This is what we call natural increase, births and deaths. Each year, Queens has about 15,000 more births than deaths. So we add, through births, about 15,000 people in Queens. So if you take the blue bar and the orange bar, that's how you get to the increase in population between 2010 and 2017. Now, foreign-born. 47% of Queens, as of 2016, it's probably up a bit, over 1.1 million foreign-born in Queens. You go back to 1970, you see it was 21%. You see the tremendous numbers, but you guys already know this. Now, the composition of the foreign-born population in the city and in your borough. And you see China continues to grow in its influence in New York City, the population from China. Most of this, of course, is mainland China. Guyana second, Ecuador, you see Bangladesh. Please make a note of this, because one of the newest trends in Queens is the influx of Bangladeshi immigrants. It is changing a whole bunch of neighborhoods. It is altering Southeast Queens. Southeast Queens, I'm jumping ahead of myself, but I don't want to forget to tell you this. Southeast Queens, what we're having now is an influx from South Asia that continues to be substantial, and loss of Black West Indian population. So people will ask me, like, why do people leave? Why are we losing that population? Because things happen in cycles. Groups come in, they establish a base. Then they find other places, jobs, retirement, and they move out. It is not anything that is necessarily negative. It has to do with the ebb and flow of people. It would be negative if there was nobody to replace the people who leave. Well, we're very lucky in this city because we have immigrants, because we have people, young people who want to come here. And we have to manage this. It's one of the reasons the Department of City Planning is around, trying to manage growth. But if you go out to the Midwest and you say, boy, you guys have a problem, you have to manage growth? We don't have growth. We need growth. Send people here. I mean, that's the kind of stuff you hear, okay? So, in a way, we have a good problem. Now, this is like my favorite chart. Now, let me tell you, you guys all had a big influence on the creation of this, because I came out here about 4 or 5 years ago, and I showed you the Hispanic population and the Asian population, because those populations are well covered in the decennial census. And then those of you who were maybe from Italy, and those of you who were asking me questions about the different Black West Indian countries, we decided to go back, and Erica and my staff, and we put together what we consider to be the composite for the entire borough now, okay? And it describes in absolute numbers, and you get the relative sense of each of the groups, the non-Hispanic white population, the non-Hispanic black population, the Asian population, and you see the Hispanic population. This is an amazing chart when you look at this. Look at the components here. Look at how similar they are. Even in the Asian pop, where the Chinese pop is still very, very big, the Asian Indian population has come on. Korea is still big. The West Indian population, and the number from Jamaica, and then the European population, Italian, Irish, Polish, Russian, German. So this is meant to give you a snapshot view. I think that this is something you probably want to put into one of the, I don't know, put it someplace and we'll update it for you every year when we get new data. And then you see the color wheel here, how this is very unique. This is what makes Queens the special place that it is. There are very few places in the country where you'll see something like this occur. When you see the white population, Hispanic, Black, and Asian populations in such relative balance. Okay, I put this up here just to remind everybody. The first chart I showed you with the bars as to why the population changes should clue you in on why we are always going to have English language instruction in the city, given the composition of immigrants. Because the people who come in are replacing people who leave. People do better and they go to other places. And as a result, we get more immigrants, and the immigrants come in and they need assistance with English language instruction. When you look at the LEP, the limited English proficient population, it is 29% of the population 5 and over. Okay, this number does not change all that much. Okay, that there is a big non-English speaking population in Queens, something you all know, but I wanted to give you some sense of the numbers. That 637,000, when you divide it, you see, of course, it's foreign born, and then you look at the languages. And this is what I was alluding to earlier. People will say to me, you know, the number of people who speak Bengali is only 6% or 5.9% of the population. That's 38,000 people. These are single digits. Polish, 2%. That's 15,000 people. Okay? So the numbers are always big. In New York City, we always deal with volume. But look, Spanish and Chinese, you know, dominate the list and are quite substantial. Now, let me just mention something. There are some various new projects that are underway in my division, and actually Erica is very close to one of these that I'm going to show you in a minute. Our 2040 population projection is 9 million, okay? We are going to be revising it later this year a bit, but it is not going to go up all that much. You saw before the population of the city is 8.6 million, okay? Queens, this is based on 2010 to 2040. So the 2010 is in the red, and the 2040 is in the blue. So when you look at the population of Queens, be now currently in the range of like 2.5. So you say to me 2.4. What are you telling me? You're telling me that Queens is not going to grow. You're saying Queens isn't going to grow. We're going to revise these numbers, and they're going to be revised a bit upward. But I think people will be surprised that they're not going to be revised upward as much as you think. Because, again, what we do with our projections is we start off, those projections show a rise in the population, and then at a certain point things start to level off. And the reason it starts to level off is because we have so much capacity in the city, and given what we know now, we feel that there's a certain limit to growth, and that's reflected here. So the 2040 number is 9 million. I get calls all the time. We're at 8.6 and it's 2017. So why aren't we going to hit 9 million in 2020? I said no. In fact, I'd be surprised if even that 8.6 million number comes out, because the kind of growth that we're talking about here is huge it's very big by any standard. So we're projecting about a 10% rate level of growth between 2010 and 2040. It will probably be revised upward a bit. Certainly in Queens, you'll see the number go up a bit too. The Bronx, though, will be the fastest growing borough based on its current demographic composition. The Bronx is a young borough. It has high fertility, and as a result, and also it has a lot of land, okay, and a zoning that permits higher densities. Brooklyn will be second in terms of the growth that we're projecting. Queens, Manhattan, and Staten Island all in that 7% range. More modest growth because lower densities, less available land, and the constraints that I talked about earlier. All right, now the big one. This, you know, we can debate all day what the population is going to be in 2040, but this is in the bag. This is something that's going to happen. We're projecting for New York City that there's going to be an increase of 41% in the population 65 and over. Okay? I don't call it elderly anymore. I call it 65 and over now. I'm getting close. So 41% increase. Anybody know what the national projection is for the population 65 and over? 100%. The population 65 and over in the U.S. is slated to double by 2040. In New York, because we have a lot of immigrants, because we are a younger population relative to the rest of the nation, it's 41. But here's the big thing. Look at these borough increases. Look at the number in Queens. We're projecting 377,000 increase, a 31% increase in the 65 and over population in Queens. And the reason why we say this from the rafters, so to speak, is we want people to be ready, because this is going to mean changes in services, is going to mean that the needs of the population are going to change substantially. And unlike my crystal ball with total population, I don't have a crystal ball. Demographers actually have a crystal ball when it comes to age. The current age of the population has a big effect on what the age is going to be 10, 20, and 30 years from now. So now, lastly, I just want you to know about this. We have undertaken a project where we are looking at the population 65 and over in 2030. We're looking at it by neighborhood tabulation area, or NTAs. On the left, we have the absolute change that we're projecting for the population 65 and over. So immediately, you see Flushing pop out, you see Jackson Heights, you see Elmhurst, you see Long Island City, you see Kew Gardens, Forest Hills, all in the darkest, meaning 20,000 or more in these neighborhoods. Now, we're giving you also, you see Far Rockaway, you see a number of neighborhoods, South Ozone Park. These neighborhoods all show up based on that analysis that I provided to you just in this last slide. Now, the reason why we give you the absolute numbers is because this is where the elevators and the escalators are going to become important, right? It's the absolute number of people. The percentages don't matter in a way. It's how many people are going to need to get up to the subway platform, right? Now, on the right is a different way to look at it. This is the percent 65 and over, where it's going to rise the most. And to many of you, especially those of you who are in Northeast Queens, this is no surprise. Douglaston, the Whitestone, and Bayside, these are areas where the percent of the population is slated to increase the most. Also, Kew Gardens, Forest Hills is in here. What you're seeing in essence is that in this case, proportionately, or that is, where is the greatest share going to be relative to total population? So, for example, in Bayside, you'll see that 25% or more of the population will be 65 and over in these communities. It gives you a sense of what the share is going to look like in terms of the total needs, okay, of a community district or of a neighborhood in this case. How many of these neighborhoods are going to have a high percentage of their population in this age group? So it's two ways of looking at it. Now, why am I showing you this? Because we have an active program now trying to project the population so that you can anticipate the kinds of needs that will occur as a result of demographic change. Let me tell you though, overall New York City is younger than the general population. Despite the increases and the severity of this, we have immigrants and we have young people who are willing to come to the city. There are a lot of places that don't have this. People are aging in place and they don't know where they're going to get the budget for services. And I can name the cities in the Midwest. I won't do it because I end up picking on one or two cities, and it doesn't seem fair. Let me mention something else. For those of you who do not know, can you see these are the community district? There are community district outlines on this map, but they're called PUMAs, public use microdata areas, in the Census Bureau's geographic scheme, the American Community Survey. We do our best to match census tracts to community districts, and we come up with these PUMA areas. So what you see here in the blue are PUMA boundaries. These are roughly the community district boundaries. NTAs are sub-areas of PUMAs. They're components of PUMAs, okay? So that when you look at a particular PUMA, in this case, this is Kew Gardens Forest Hills, it's part of this larger area which approximates the community district. So our goal is to give you the ability to look below the community district level. So in a place like Community District 7, where you've got, but by the way, these are PUMA numbers, these are not community district numbers. We have an equivalency table on our website. Community District 7, obviously College Point, Flushing, and Bayside are very different places, right? And this gives you the ability to kind of zoom in a bit. So I'm going to stop now with this. If you can hold questions till later, I'll be happy to do it. But what I'd like to do now is zoom in on our neighborhoods and talk to you a little bit about this tool that we have developed, which gives you the ability to drill down and learn more about the communities you're living in.
So, like Joe said, this is our profile tool.
Is it on?
It's our new population fact finder. It has replaced our old census fact finder. It's on. And for those of you who have used the old census fact finder, you'll find this one a lot more intuitive. We've included a lot more in terms of data that's available in this profiling tool. We've increased the number of geographies that you can aggregate together. We've also included other geographies that you can build with. We've included visuals and change over time for all variables. And then just so that you know what's going into this is we use data from the decennial census and from the American Community Survey. The decennial census, as you may know, has the full count data, so you can use that. It's our gold standard, which everything is based off of. But there's limited variables that are included, and it's also from 2010. So at this point in 2018, we might be a little beyond what you want to see from that. So we've included data from the American Community Survey. That includes a whole host of variables, but there are data reliability issues that come along with that. And you'll see as we get into the profiles, we gray out data that we've marked as unreliable so that you know when you shouldn't be using this data in your reports. So I'll get into this. There's different ways that we can build a study area. If we want to start with an address, if anyone has an address they want to use.
2719.
There we go. So it comes up on this list, and we can zoom to that spot. And you can see here, it starts as a geography using census tracts, and you can change it to neighborhood or PUMA or census block. Census block we only have available for the decennial profile because they're such small areas. We'll start with the one census tract of your area. So you can see, if you zoom in, you can actually see the street print, so you know what you're looking at. So from here, you click on View Profile, and you'll get full profiles for your data. And as I mentioned, data that's not reliable will turn up as gray. So as we know, census tracts are very small areas, and a lot of the data for that individual census tract are not necessarily reliable. What this tool does is allows you to build up to a larger study area to get to an area that has reliable data. So you can still use something like the percent 65 and over from this profile because it's appearing as a black value. It's 12.7%. But if you wanted to look at something like the under 18 population, you'd either have to build a larger study area or you can go to the census profile. And from here, everything will appear as black because it is reliable data. So we can go back to, let's see, the demographic profile. And if you wanted to look at these margins of error, which are incorporated in here to know if your area is reliable or not, you can turn on Show Reliability Data. And you can see here the margins of error and the coefficient of variation that are included. So if our standards don't meet your needs, you can make your own judgments here. So what we can do is go back to our map, and we can actually build a larger study area from here. So if we wanted to, if you want to add census tracts around here, I don't know what area you want to continue looking at, we can draw that on. We can draw it with a polygon tool, so you can click and just add these census tracts if you wanted to. You can also, let's say we wanted to look at this area and include a radius around it. You can do that, and you can zoom out to, let's say, half a mile. It deselects the areas that are already selected, so you will have to add those. You can also click on and off areas that you want to take out of your selection. So we can kind of go into a smaller area. And now you'll see that most of the data are reliable and ready to use. You'll also see that all of these selected areas that you're choosing are shown with a comparison area. So the default is New York City, but let's say you wanted to compare it to Queens to get a relative sense of what your area looks like compared to Queens. You can do that. So you can say your area has 11% 65 and over compared to Queens, there's 14%, and you can add that to your reports. You also see that we have charts along the side, and your selected area is in blue, and your comparison area is with this little dot, and each of them have margin of error bars. So you'll see these gray bars on the side. And you can do this with race if you wanted to, Hispanic subgroups. We can go over to the social profile and you can see more of this. You can also go to a specific section of the profile. We have these drop-down menus for each of the profiles, so you can see what's included in the profiles. So if you wanted to go to something like educational attainment, you can just drop down to that section of the profile, and you can see that the bachelor's degree or higher in this area compared to the rest of Queens is significantly lower. You can also, there's place of birth if we wanted to look at that. So foreign born population is 57% compared to the rest of Queens, which is about 48%. And you can see that in the chart. If the margin of error bars are not overlapping, you can make a big deal of these two areas compared to each other. And then another thing that we can look at is in economic. We have, in income and benefits, we have median household income. So we have medians and means across our profiles, which if you know from downloading data from the Census Bureau, if you have multiple census tracts that you're adding together, they don't aggregate medians for you. You have to calculate that on your own. So we do that for you so that you don't have to do the math for that. So in many cases, people come here just for this one figure, or they come for the entire profile. We can look at poverty if we want. We can look at the population below poverty, 20% in this area. And we can look at housing, and there's a host of variables there. So you have everything from median gross rent to value to tenure. And we can also look at change over time. So what we've done is look at 2006 to 10, which is the ACS period for that time point, compared to 12 to 16. So we looked at two non-overlapping 5-year periods. And what you'll see here in these right columns is the data for that change. And you won't see much in terms of reliable data because they're very close periods of time. But when something does stand out, you know you're making a big deal about it. So in this area, there was an increase, an 8% increase in housing units. So that's pretty significant and something that you would want to take note of. You can look at the demographics of that too. Nothing, oh. No, there is a drop in the other South American, but nothing else besides that is really popping out. We can go back to the map and you can see, we'll clear this and look at another area. We can look at neighborhood tabulation areas, and we can turn on things in the advanced options like community districts so that you can see the outlines that Joe is just showing you. We can put that over Puma so you see where they overlap. In most cases, there are things like, my favorite example is the Bushwick CD and Puma, which don't overlap. So in those cases, you would want to go and build your own area. But in a lot of cases, they do. So you can use the Puma data in place of the community district. In these cases, if you wanted to go and carve out an area, you can select the Puma of that community district and zoom in and start deselecting your area or building to it so that you can get a more specific study area for your needs. We can also turn on the subway lines, and you can see all of those throughout the city. And so you can help guide your search that way. We can look at things like the council districts, neighborhoods again. And we also have thematic maps. So you can look at things, as Joe was mentioning, that language is a really important piece for us all to look at. You can look at things like limited English proficiency across the NTAs. This is done at the NTA level. So you can see this data where there's concentrations of population that would need language services. So Jackson Heights, Elmhurst, Flushing all stand out as the top category of 32,000 or more. So if you were looking, let's say we want to look at Flushing, we can look at the languages that are included in this LEP population. So here, 66% of the population speak English less than very well. And we can go down to the section of speaks English less than very well, and you can see which languages are popping out. So about 13% Spanish, and 66% Chinese, and about 10% Korean. So these are languages that you would want to include in your language services, and we have all of this for each of these areas, and you can build up your own custom area. If we want to look at another address or area of interest, we can do that, and we can kind of drill down to other areas.
Anybody have another address?
Neighborhood?
Address, you want an address?
She's like, my block.
175 14 Mayfield.
175.
14 Mayfield.
There we go. So it'll come up here. And what do you want to do with the area? Do you want to look at the census tract and the neighborhood?
Well, perimeter.
I don't know, pick something.
Over 65 population.
No, we'll check that out.
Yeah. So we'll draw about a quarter-mile radius, and it'll select all of the census tracts. We can also change it over to neighborhood, and you see that it wound up selecting all the neighborhoods that those tracts intersected with. But let's look at census tracts, and we'll do that. So we have 4 census tracts selected for your study area. And do you want to do a comparison area? Do you want to do it to a neighborhood or to
Okay, to another neighborhood.
61, 23, right left.
what neighborhood is that in?
Blended.
Okay, so we'll look at Glendale. Okay, so we have, in the selected area, we have the address with the 4 tracts selected, and the comparison area is the Glendale neighborhood. So we can look here at the age distribution, and you can see if anything stands out. They look very similar. There's very few differences here. But if we look at 65 and over, also very similar. So you'll see here that the percentage point difference between the 2 areas is gray. You don't necessarily want to make a big deal about that. Median age also very close. here's something. So with those 4 census tracts, we have the Black non-Hispanic population stands out more than Glendale, NTA. Asian non-Hispanic, 53% compared to 4% in the Glendale, NTA. So those are things that you would, want to note. You can see that that population is Asian Indian. Is there a variable that you were interested in besides those? You wanted to look at, you can look at educational attainment. So those 4 census tracts have 52% bachelor's degree or higher compared to the Glendale NTA, which is about 24%. And you can see that here, those big differences. We have a lot of people who are living in the same house in both areas.
Nobody's moving?
No one's moving.
That's a good point. Compare the income.
The income, sure.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll go down to median household income. They're pretty close, yeah, 66,000 compared to about 71,000. We want to look at, what else can we look at? The housing tenure, we can look at 61% renter occupied in those tracts compared to about 51% in the Glendale NTA. Also pretty similar. So these 2 areas are kind of the same in terms of these demographics that we've looked at. But if we want to look at 2 very different areas to see in these charts that stand out, we want to, should we do the Upper East Side compared to Duke, Brighton Beach?
Not Brighton Beach, do
Borough Park, sure.
We're going to show you how the population pyramids work.
Yeah, so these are fun when you look at the population pyramid. So in the selected area, which is the blue bars, we have the Upper East Side, which we know is a little older. There's some in the middle age groups that are included.
In the
But
blue, right?
when you look at the dots, which is Borough Park, you see the younger population stand out. So the younger population is down here, and that's significantly larger than what we're seeing on the Upper East Side.
True. Yeah. So if you stick to Queens and you look at South Jamaica and Breezy Point.
Sure.
Okay.
So we can
I think the age is
do,
going to be the same.
Let's
The
see.
age is going to be the same.
See, once you start typing it in, it gives you a selection. You can just type it up.
so here are the 2. South
Wow.
Jamaica's in blue and Breezy Point's with the dots.
Wow, Breezy Point's a lot older.
Yeah. And you can see here,
Wow, look
Breezy
at that.
Point, about 20%, 65 years and over,
The median
compared
age.
to the 10% in South Jamaica.
Median age is
The income is going to be different.
We can look at that.
Yeah, let's see.
So if we go down to income, yeah, a
Oh,
lot
jeez.
different. So this is South Jamaica, about 48,000 compared to 81,000 in Breezy Point.
That's those government pensions. Those jobs at fire.
Insurance coverage.
We also have things like insurance coverage, really a whole host of variables. A lot of these were added by request from agencies or communities that are looking at specific variables frequently. So we like to continue to add things that are of use to you. So if you, after playing around with this, notice things that you use on a daily basis that aren't in the application, please continue to give us feedback because we will have a future update to this application. So we have things like 65 and over disability, and you can see how that looks in your area compared to another, if you're planning those resources. So lots of things you can do with this. Change over time is really big. I know that when we're looking at reports and you're looking how your area has changed, this is something that can help you quickly look at how your area has recently changed. And before we, if you have any other areas that you want to look at, I just want to mention that we have throughout the application these tooltips. They're little question marks that are throughout the application. And if you were, wanted to know a little bit about the calculations or the definitions of something, we have that included. We have copy to clipboard, so you can copy an entire table and put that into Excel if you wanted to share that with someone. We have download data, so that if you wanted to use this after you use it in the application, you can do so. There's also a really interesting part is our shareable links. So every area that you create, along with every comparison area and profile view, gets this unique link, so you can share it with your coworkers or community, or you can save it for the next time you need to use it, so that you don't have to create your area over and over again. There's also in our About page our email address if you have any questions about the application, or if you want to submit feedback or future updates that you wanted to include. We have a high-level tutorial that's on YouTube. If you type in YouTube and population fact finder, you can get to it. If you go to the features page, you can see each of the features that are in the application if you wanted to understand a little bit more about each of those. And also with the data, if you wanted to get a basic understanding of the data that's included in the application. Yeah, so if there's any other areas, or we can jump back over to the census. Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, and then for the last piece of this, and one that I'm sure you're all interested in is, I forgot my clicker. The decennial census, the 2020 census, and what's happening on this front. All of you in the room know this, but I'll repeat it anyway because it's something we all have to make sure we understand. When the census is taken, it's the basis for the distribution of political power in the country, essentially. The constitutional mandate of the census is to ensure that the delegation size for each state is created based on the population count. We draw political districts based on those population counts, and a lot of federal money gets distributed each year. The total federal pot each year is about $600 billion, and that money goes to the states, at least in part, based on population counts. All right, a few facts, just so in case you don't know. April 1, 2020 is the reference point for all questions on the census. You get your questionnaire maybe in March, it's as of April 1st. You fill it out in May, it's as of April 1st. The census mailings actually start in mid-March, and depending on internet access, you may or may not get a census questionnaire. In fact, 80% of the country is not getting a census questionnaire in the first mailing. You're going to get a letter, and the letter's going to have a link, and they're going to ask you to go to the internet and fill it out. Okay? If you don't fill it out, the second mailing will include a questionnaire. About 20% of the country, where the data from the FCC and from census surveys shows us that there is not a very good access to the internet, they will get a questionnaire the first time around. But the bottom line is there'll be up to 5 mailings, postcards, letter reminders, in an effort to get you to respond. After the 5 mailings, starting the first week of May, thousands of census workers will start to go out and knock on doors. So the way to keep a census worker from not knocking on your door is to answer the questionnaire, okay? For most households, non-response follow-up starts in May, and the census is mostly concluded by July. Now, innovation. This is what the Census Bureau is trying to do. They're using the internet this time around to save money, but they're also using the internet for other reasons. When you capture data via the internet, as I use the word capture for a specific reason, the data are taken in immediately. And if something goes wrong, the Census Bureau should know it on the fly. Illustration. Back in 2010, Northwest Queens, Jackson Heights, and Astoria were pretty seriously under-enumerated for a problem that could have been presented with technology from Federal Express and UPS. What the Census Bureau did in Northwest Queens is that in one census office, they decided to go home early, so to speak. Instead of going out 5 or 6 times, maybe they went out once or twice. If they had trouble the third time, instructions were given, just call it vacant. So if you look at a map for vacant, change in vacant housing units between 2000 and 2010, you would find your dream apartment. Because the fact of the matter is that the Census Bureau said the number of vacant units in these areas skyrocketed. I'm talking about blocks where the number of vacant units was 20 or 30. Blocks where census tracts where the number of vacant units went up by 300%. I sat with Mayor Bloomberg 1 year after the results were released, and we looked at the map of Northwest Queens, and he asked the Census Bureau director, "What are you going to do about this? We know something went wrong." The Bureau director said, we can't go back and recreate history. That was over a year ago. I can't go back and do that." And this underscores something that's very important. We have to live with the census for a decade. Those results become official, and we have to live with it, which is why we're mobilizing in such an intense way. But if we had one of these innovations that the Bureau is now trying to adopt, real-time tracking, when those interviewers went out and they started calling 10, 20, 30, 40 units in a census tract vacant, because you have instant capture, the regional director will know that something's awry. A flag goes up. Other examples of flags. An interviewer goes out to knock on doors, and all the interviews are 60 to 90 seconds long. It's a little clue that maybe that person is not doing what they're supposed to do. So this real-time tracking, again, stuff that's in use now for FedEx and UPS, is what they're going to try to use. They're going to use administrative data from postal records. How they're going to use it? They want to minimize, they want to try to lower the volume of door knocks. And one way they're going to try to do it is by looking at postal records, address delivery records. If an apartment has not gotten mail in 90 days, they're going to visit once and then they're going to call it vacant. The jury remains out on whether this is actually going to work or not. We're working closely with the Census Bureau to help them evaluate this. They may use administrative data to fill in the blanks. Instead of going out 6 times, they'll pull an IRS record, they'll pull Social Security records, and they will essentially determine your characteristics using a computer algorithm. And then another big one. You're at a basketball game, it's halftime, something goes up on the marquee. Have you filled out your census form? It's April of 2020. If you haven't, pull out your phone now. You write in your address on the letter that you get. There'll be a census ID that you'll put in to answer on the internet. But you don't need it now. They are going to tell you, just put your address in, okay? You're at the ball game, and fill out the questions right now, and you filled out your census form. They want to give people the freedom to answer without that unique identifier. Again, maybe good, maybe not so good. Now, what are we doing at city planning and with the city? Okay, I love this. Not only because it was a real estate agent in Richmond Hill, but this was an article in Bloomberg Business, March 2018. This is what we're dealing with. Add to this a layer of fear.
okay? We have to try to reach people and make it personal. The Census Bureau is going to have an outreach campaign. It's going to be national. They're going to have fewer people in the field. They're going to have fewer people following up and fewer census offices. New York City is going to get 13 census offices, out of which the census will be conducted, and out of which there'll be thousands of people hired to do the job. But it's going to be far fewer than in the past. Bless you. In 2010, New York City had 20 census offices. Now we're going to have 13. Fewer resources on the part of the Census Bureau to deal with all the problems that you and I know exist. Language barriers, oh God, privacy intrusiveness. Put aside the current climate for a second of immigrant angst, and just look and just think about, you know, the Equifax breach, all the breaches we hear about every day. It goes beyond a foreign-born, native-born issue, you know. Internet access across neighborhoods is not even. And of course, there's fear of the federal government, which we know. So our strategy, or the strategy that will be adopted, all right, let me just tell you quickly. City Hall is very shortly going to be putting out a posting for a director of 2020 Census Outreach and a deputy director of 2020 Census Outreach. This office is being funded by the city to the tune of over $4 million. There's going to be a director hired, a deputy director, and there are going to be a whole bunch of outreach specialists hired. And there's going to be several $1 million for ethnic advertising. On top of that, we have had a list of nonprofits. I can't tell you how many people have come forward and have said we want to help. Even for-profit operations, we want to help. So City Hall, under Deputy Mayor Phil Thompson, is responsible for this effort. But yours truly is the census ambassador until this happens. I am a demographer. I am a technical specialist. I support the outreach effort. I'm not very big on parades. I don't know about the social organizing. Hopefully, we'll get somebody in this position who is very good. I want to recommend to the borough president that we start thinking about who that person might be. Because when those announcements are made in a few short weeks, when those job descriptions come out, we should nominate, as a community, you should think about nominating people for that post. Because that person is going to be carrying the census message, which is going to be designed to be personal. Everyday experiences. What do you stand to lose if you don't stand up for yourself? These are some of the objectives of that office as it's being created. Tailored census message. The national message is not going to work in New York. Build a network that engages community leaders. Be proactive with questionnaire assistance. In 2010, the Census Bureau had physical offices in communities where you could go and they would help you with your questionnaire. No more. No physical offices. The city of New York is going to try to establish those physical offices so that we hold your hand in the local health center, the local community center, so you can answer. Work with the Bureau to ensure that local workers are hired locally. Anybody have any idea how many people are going to be hired to do the census in New York City? It's probably, the figure is going to be 20 to 25,000, okay? And some of those are going to be short-term, there'll be a few weeks, but a bunch of those are going to be longer-term. And we want, in your communities, you need to have people who live in the community, work in the community. Oh, by the way, the starting salary for most of these jobs will be $25 an hour, okay? Because the federal government knows with the unemployment rate the way it is, and the difficulty in getting people involved, they're going to have to pay for it. Community leaders have to be educated on Title 13. Title 13 is the law of the land. It says essentially that your responses on the census cannot be used by anyone, including other federal agencies, including in a court of law. It cannot be used against you, okay? You wouldn't know that in the climate we're in, because that's kind of the goal of the people who are trying to suppress the count. The people on the outside, the people who are trying to do this, want you to believe that somehow this is not the law of the land, but it is the law of the land. And it's very important to make sure that. And then, I'm going to let the last one go for a minute. All right. I just want to show you the national model for outreach, okay? The national model for outreach says that people who rent, immigrants, persons who speak language other than English, don't speak English well, all of these cause lower response in the census. If you rent, if you are on the lower part of the income scale, if you have language issues, okay, these all suppress initial response to the census. Now let me show you a map. This is a map of mail return rates. This is initial response to the census, which is highly correlated with overall response. Here is your borough. The lighter colors mean higher response, the darker colors lower response. Now, the national model, you heard what I just said, right? The highest mail response rates, initial response, in New York City in 2010 were in Washington Heights, Inwood, Washington Heights, Jackson Heights. The highest level of response in the city. Response rates were up there close to 80%, 75, 80%. What happened to the national model? Okay, Washington Heights is all renters. A lot of people don't speak English and have problems with the English language. Income is certainly not very, very high. Look at where the response was the lowest. North Bronx, Williamsbridge, Wakefield. Okay, Southeast Queens. All right, look at Slough, Springfield Gardens, Rosedale. You see this whole core in here. Also, Richmond Hill, South Ozone Park. North Corona, South Corona. I'm sorry, East Elmhurst, North Corona, South Corona. Okay, College Point, Flushing. All right. Again, we have to be leery about anything involving Astoria because the data was just not that good. But Astoria, all of these areas you see here. Central Brooklyn, Bushwick, Bedford-Stuyvesant, Ocean Hill, Brownsville, East New York, Canarsie. The lowest rates were in the African American neighborhoods of the city. And here's the rub. The income. You've read the articles, I'm sure, in the past and today. Southeast Queens is among the highest homeowning and wealthiest black communities in the country. Its rate was very, very low. So this goes beyond some of the simple rules that the federal government creates when it designs its outreach. New York is unique. We have to figure out a way to cut through this and get the African American community of the city to respond. And it's been historically true, irrespective of socioeconomic level. And the immigrant communities frequently are among the highest. Why? We feel it's outreach. That the reason why, we did this statistical model. Being Dominican ups your response rate by itself. Because we believe it has to do with the outreach that was so awesome in the Dominican community and in the Hispanic communities of the city in general. Is that going to be compromised? That's what we're afraid of. The community leaders have to stand strong. So we're designing a whole strategy and making it personal. Some of the things that we're talking about, grants, for again on fund allocation. Some of the points we want to make: children in poverty, Title I funding for schools, special education grants that kids receive. Affects a lot of students in the city. And who could argue with this one? The state gets $1.6 billion a year for bridge and roadway maintenance and construction. There's insurance for uninsured children, health center grants that fund community health centers, and we don't want to leave out businesses because the for-profit community is coming forward because they're realizing how dependent they are on data from the census to figure out who's out there in the market, where to locate, site location for businesses. So this is the overall strategy. And I want to end, I want to tell you about one other thing that we're doing, okay? And right now, my division is involved in the address list review for the census. In March, we got a file with 3.5 million addresses for the entire city. And the Census Bureau said you have 120 days to tell us what's wrong, okay? 2 years ago, we started doing field work all over the city, identifying blocks that had complex address issues. We are now working on taking that field work and taking the information the Census Bureau has given us to identify where the Census Bureau is missing addresses. So far, we've done the Bronx and we've done Staten Island. We have till August 6th to finish this. In the Bronx, we have 14,000 addresses that are not on their list. In Staten Island, 5,000 addresses. The preliminary number for Brooklyn looks like it may go as high as 40,000 addresses. We expect Queens to be in that 30,000 range. When all is said and done, we probably will give the Census Bureau about 100,000 addresses that they don't have right now. So that means 100,000 questionnaires or requests for response will go out that would otherwise have not gone out. I want to leave you with this one thing that's really important. The census is a count of people, but never forget it's a count of people in a particular place. If you do not have an address that the Census Bureau recognizes, you don't get counted. Because reapportionment and redistricting are based on where you're counted. And putting you on that map is critical. You've got to have an address that gets recognized. So it's sad to say, but this can happen. You can fill out a form and not get counted because of the fact the address is not recognized, which is why we spend so much time, several years, working on the list of addresses. And the good news is, once the Census Bureau accepts an address, they have to put somebody in that address, unless they call it vacant, okay? Right, like I said, they went wild with that in a couple of neighborhoods. By the way, they also did the same thing in a bunch of neighborhoods in southwest Brooklyn. They said that the vacancy rate in Dyker Heights and Bay Ridge went up by like 300%. It's ridiculous. And so they have to put people in those units. So if after the first, the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth time they go back, they determine that people do live in that basement, they're going to use a computer algorithm to put people in the basement. Okay, that's what will give us our numbers. What we're concerned about is that there'll be people in those housing units that are not getting counted. The housing unit may be counted, they may come up with, they may put people in there, but it may not be accurate. We're going after fair representation and accuracy. So I'm going to stop there, and I thank you all very much for listening to all of this. And let me just say this. You need to stay on top of what's happening at City Hall on the census front, because you are, all of you, you're the community leadership. You have people in your communities that might work directly on the census effort with City Hall. Deputy Mayor Thompson needs to know about it. Okay? It's really important that we communicate that, because recruiting good people is going to be a key to this whole effort. All right, thank you very much.
Sure, thank you, Dr. Sauer. That was a lot of information. Thank you, Erica. Yeah, that was a lot for us to digest.
I know.
I think a lot of the information can make us very optimistic in the opportunities, especially when we're planning for our communities and projects comes before the community boards, and we think about how to best serve our communities as they're changing. I think the population fact finder could be helpful in determining what the board should be asking for when projects come across. And I had a specific question about, I know you mentioned about a YouTube tutorial on how to use it, but if any of the boards or their land use committees or anyone else in the committee wants a tutorial on how to use those, maybe there's a way you could assist in that.
Yeah, we'd be happy to. We're also trying to set up right now a workshop for the community board, so that should happen sometime this summer, so you should be getting an email from our office soon about that. But if you want us to come out and give a tutorial, we'd be happy to.
Right, and then the information on the 2020 census count. And just want to remind everyone that, the borough president is putting together a complete count committee for the 2020 census because we want to be supportive and make sure that everyone is counted. So if someone wants to be a part of that, please let Susie Tannenbaum know. If you want to be a part of that committee. But that just shows us all the work we have ahead of us to make sure that our communities and everyone in our communities are being counted. And if we can do whatever we can to make sure that we are facing the obstacles and challenges together, I think that's another area of opportunity for us, no matter how daunting. Just want to open up for questions. Any?
Points, are we
Sure.
going to get a copy of this? Number one.
Absolutely.
And then Joe, Dr. Bill, the timing of the time of year of his census, we have a lot of snowbirds, especially in Queens, and they're not going to be around. How are you going to count them?
What'll happen is that there's on the census questionnaire, there are actually 10 questions. There are 8 questions for each individual and 10 questions for the head of household. 2 of those questions involve whether you live at that residence most of the year or not. So let's say they're in Florida, okay? And in Florida, they'll be asked, where do you live most of the time, okay? And if most of the time is in Glendale, then they are going to be enumerated in Glendale, okay? There are specific questions. The Census Bureau is really big on this, and they put you back into Glendale. That's how it will work.
Clive?
Yeah, you pointed out that big problem in Southeast Queens in terms of response. Now, not for nothing, one of the most educated communities,
That's the
high per
point.
capita income. So if outreach cannot be just one problem, there must be some other problem. What have you identified as that?
Well, I'm spending part of my life right now because of the threats to the census that people see because of the addition of citizenship to the questionnaire. Okay, I'm spending a big chunk of my life trying to make people understand that it goes well beyond the immigrant problem. It is an immigrant problem, there's no question. Immigrants are threatened, the environment we're living in. Everybody remember, every census throughout history is sensitive, has to be sensitive to the climate in the country at the time. Questions get added and taken out and so on because of the needs of the society, right? And when we're in this kind of environment, there are those threats, and people are very recognizing that. But I don't want people to forget that in New York, the biggest problem is probably in the African American community. It is not solely an immigrant problem. In fact, in the past, like in DC, some immigrant communities have done well. Why is it happening? I'd be lying to you if I told you I understood. I think the source has to be the linkage with the community leaders. Community leaders have to meet with the person who is going to direct the outreach effort and come together and figure out how to make not answering in the census a problem for people. In other words, people need to feel like they're part of something. And by answering the census, they're standing up for who they are. And without that message, we're going to have a problem again. But this is where the community leadership has to rise up. I have to tell you, I think the linchpin in the entire census is going to be the community leaders, the trusted voices. Are they convinced that it's okay to tell their congregations, for example, that they should answer? Is it safe to answer? Will the city have your back? Okay, that's the kind of thing, those are the kinds of messages that we have to work on. But getting involved with whoever the director is, or maybe nominating somebody from Southeast Queens who could direct the census operation, would be really important, I think.
Dr. Silva, I know you said that, going back to the Southeast Queens issue, that the 2010 census was evident and reflective of other past census as well. I was just wondering if, like, migration of African Americans to New York, did you see at like the beginning of a certain century, you saw the responses more? I mean, I just get a sense that sometimes communities of Americans of African descent are overlooked because they're taken for granted because they've been here so long that maybe that they would automatically respond. So therefore, the outreach isn't as robust as it is for some recent migrants or even immigrants. So I'm just wondering if over time you've seen it sort of the response rate drop off in communities of African Americans.
Since the undercount by race in the country was pretty bad in 1960 and 1970. It's only really been measured since like 1940 or 50. If you go back to 60 or 70, the differential undercount, as it was called, the differences between the race groups, was actually much wider than it is even up to 2000 and 2010. It remains, but it was actually worse back then. It's gotten a bit better, but now we're afraid we're headed in the absolutely the other direction again. It still exists. It has gotten a bit better, but still, if you look at the rates by race, it's still lowest in the African American community. And let me say this, in the Afro-Caribbean community, which really puzzles me, because when you look at the level of political involvement, for example, in the Haitian community, you don't understand it. You know, the Caribbean influence in New York and the political participation and so on, it just doesn't make sense. But then again, we said that about the Puerto Rican community for decades. The Puerto Rican community in Puerto Rico is incredibly vibrant and politically active, and come to the States and it's not that way. So, you see, this is why we need somebody at the helm who has the insight.
You're right, because the economy comes from, I think you mentioned the trust. There's a trust factor that's operating, and the leaders have to do everything to bridge that trust point. So I trust that you'll be coming to our community board for 13.
Yeah.
And helping us with some information that can strengthen our hand in this whole thing. And you're right, we need to really make sure that the leader of that census move in that area is strong and has the best interest. Yep.
And probably get the community leaders.
I just remember, I think it was in 2010, I had someone knocking on my door. I'm in Community Board 12, Southeast Queens, and she was like threatening. So, like, why are you threatening me?
I won't go away unless you answer. You want me to go away, answer.
And it was a big turnoff. I don't even think I sent mine in that year. So, I mean, I can see, it depends
What
who's knocking
neighborhood?
on your door. South, right in St. August. Yeah, which I think might be better for our community. But they only come out if you don't, because I didn't answer the first time.
Is anyone aware of another census that took place, some localized census that took place in the last year?
Yeah.
All right. Every year, every year, 3.54 million households nationwide get something called the American Community Survey. It's about 295,000 households a month. For those of you who remember past censuses, it used to be called a long form. 60 questions on everything from, the data that Erica showed you. Your rent, your income, your origins, your educational attainment. I haven't been lucky enough to get one of them yet. We kind of want to get it. So, but that's what you're thinking about. It's called the ACS American Community Survey.
Then you're in the profile.
You're in the profiles, literally. And it's very important that those get answered because that's based on a sample. So when you start missing cases, for example, in Southeast Queens, all of a sudden a piece of the Jamaican population is missing. And you don't want that to happen. So just trying to make people aware. And Title 13 is the law of the land. I mean, if we can go back in history and talk about things that may or may not have happened, and so on. But it is the law of the land. 1954, which is a special year for me. So I don't forget that. And it's been the law of the land ever since, and it's held. It would take a new law to change it. It would take an act of Congress to change it. And that's not likely to happen, because then the census would come apart. Without Title 13, there would be no census.
Any other questions? We'll give you Renee. Let's see if anyone else has any questions. Look at that. I'm surprised.
He's good.
Everyone knows it. Okay.
Was the response from the Southeast Queens worse than the year before, what was the year before the 2010 census? Did it get worse?
2000. I don't want to say off the top of my head, I have to look.
I'd like to know.
Yeah, I can find out.
I think we were going through the recession during 2010 maybe?
Well, things were starting to, things were not great, but things
Yeah.
were starting to come back.
So that also
Yeah.
might count.
Yeah, but the shock is, what was mentioned before, is that this is a community with some wealth and homeowning. And that's why I'm afraid of the Census Bureau, because they say if you own your own house and you have money, that you're a shoo-in
Right.
to answer the census. Hell no, not in New
And I
York.
think, yeah, and I think that's part of the issue.
And we don't want them dictating to us what the outreach strategy is going to look like. We don't want to rely on their commercials. We want to have our own. And fortunately, we have right now a really good faith effort occurring. That's why please think about people that you might want to see work centrally at City Hall on the census, or people that you want to see work in your local communities. We want the heads of those local census offices, we want them to be New York City people. We want to be residents from Queens Village or from Hollis. We want them to be there. We don't want people from outside of the city necessarily doing this. We might have
I would
city
make sure
residents
that.
getting involved in the hiring. The regional director of the Census Bureau knows he's not going to be able to get enough people. He wants to work through us to get people. So one of the main jobs of the Director of Outreach is going to be to set up a mechanism so that the Bureau looks to us for the hiring, works with us to hire people. We send them candidates and send them people who are going to take these jobs.
Community board should definitely be.
Oh, you are a major linchpin in all of this.
All right.
Yeah, so ask for briefings. Once the director's appointed, just ask the Deputy Mayor Thompson, do you want briefings on this, periodic briefings on this? And then we'll bring in the community boards. What are we doing? How are we doing this? Who's getting hired where? I mean, that's the kind of stuff that the Director of Outreach, God rest his or her soul. I'm sorry, that was bad. I should never do that.
Oh, no. Same one to fail. Jean, you had a question?
You mentioned the post office, and I probably will tell you that's probably your biggest problem, since they can't seem to deliver the mail to the addresses that we have. So I have a problem with them if you're going to use them. We've gone through now, if you go on the internet, you try to order anything, my address, and I saw you type it, you're one of the few that type 22-11. They just take the dashes out now.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah, I know.
And then we have, as the building department changes the code, that you don't have to name the buildings anything you like. We can have the 27th floor, we can have the 14th floor, we can have the 6th floor. Since I went through that in Manhattan at 1 West Street, which has been a more formidable problem. So you're talking about not getting mail, you better start fixing some of the problems, because you're never going to get the mail. They make vanity addresses, people disappear, people don't disappear, complexes appear on the thing, and they're not in the system. So I sympathize with you, I just warn you, that's one of your biggest pitfalls. Love the post office, but trying to get the mail out there is a tough thing. And then they added 4 more digits onto the zip code, which you don't know. Sometimes you can't even get, usually you know your 5-digit code, but now they want the other 4 that you have no idea what that is all about, and that pops up on a lot of the forms that are coming out. So if you're worrying about the people just trying to write the name on the form, they're not going to even get past that part, okay? And I don't mean to be facetious. I get very frustrated when I see the unnecessary stuff that they put on the form. So I warn you about the post office. There you go.
Thank you, Jean.
And the Census Bureau uses the post office files twice a year to update the addresses.
Yeah, I just...
Any other questions after that? All right, well, let's thank Dr. Salvo, and let's thank Erica, Mara, again, for their presentation. And just want to remind everyone that the next meeting of the joint, let me say it, Howie. You're trying to take my job. The next meeting of the joint Queensborough Board and Borough Cabinet meeting is Monday, July 9th at 5:30. Thank you. Have a great evening.
That's why I can't hold my Uber.
So you can hire me. I know.